What's something you've only seen once in your life but will never forget? Story 1, I was super lucky to witness this. When I was in 4th grade or so, my family went on a trip to Yellowstone. On one of our long day drives, we're on one side of a valley, and we see a few cars pulled off the road, and there was a guy with a telescope set up. So we pulled over. It was just around sunset, perhaps just after, and he waves for us to come over and take a look, and I see 2 wolves running on the edge of the tree line on the other side of the valley. One was dark brown or black, and the other white. As I'm watching, he explains that these are the first wild wolves to return to this area in like 50 or something years. I remember how they were just running together side by side like 2 dogs you'd see at a dog park. On that same trip, we got to watch a mother grizzly and her 2 cubs hunting deer across a massive field. The herd would run off, and the mother grizzly would circle back to see if they had left any calves hidden in the grass. It seemed like she had no luck, so she came up towards the road where there was about 100 cars, all taking photos and video. This is like 2003, so imagine a bunch of big, bulky cameras on tripods. Grizzly moved fast as hell, so everyone is suddenly stuffing their equipment and bodies back into their cars as this bear is quickly near us. She was used to it, though, and just walked right across the road and up a hill and started digging through a big log for grubs. Edit. Sorry, not caribou. Mule deer might have been what we saw. It wasn't a herd of bison, I can remember that. This was over 20 years ago. Story 2. Sometime in the fall, years ago, I was walking on a remote country road, cornfields on one side, the river on the other, and saw monarch butterflies everywhere, hundreds of them. At the time, I didn't know what was going on, but enjoyed them on my 2-mile hike. Went back the next day and didn't see one. I later learned I got to witness a monarch migration. Story 3. About 20 years ago, I was driving up the mountains of western Wyoming one morning at the end of a mild rainstorm. To my left was a rainbow that appeared to follow me just a few yards away from my car. As I turned a corner, the rainbow seemed to drop directly into a mountain lake. I wish I'd found a place to pull over and take it in longer. Story 4. A dude landing his parachute to our school's soccer field. This was year 2004 or 2005, when I was still in 4th or 5th grade, and it was random, as because we were just having recess, and suddenly this man lands his rainbow-colored parachute out of nowhere. The cops arrested him as apparently he didn't have any permits or something, but all the kids were cheering him out. Story 5. To answer this, I must explain the time. Setting. I was having dinner with my family in downtown Manhattan to start college. Before dinner, I went to the observation deck at the World Trade Center. It was a beautiful afternoon around dusk, thinking to myself how lucky I am to be going to college in my home city, but did not have a camera, cell phones, did not have them yet, kids. So I just took it all in, how cool it is to see Manhattan from the tallest building in the city. This was Friday, September 7th, 2001. Story 6. I was on an oceanographic expedition on my night shift. A friend and I were the only ones on the deck. Then we saw something shiny in the water, and it was a bunch of glowing dolphins. They were playing among some bioluminescent organisms, got covered in them, and they turned bioluminescent themselves. All this while they were swimming and jumping in the dark water. The most incredible thing I ever saw in my life. Story 7. Fireflies, all of them. Around 1979 or so, outside of Nashville, Tennessee, I was driving with the top down around sunset, just cruising through the countryside. I drove along the sweeping right-hand curve with pastures on the right, probably 100 yards or more to the tree line. There were millions of fireflies, it seemed. I remember thinking at the time, there's got to be a firefly for every cubic foot up to about 5 or 6 feet high. Just millions of them rising from the pasture, blinking and glowing, just doing firefly things. I actually pulled over and watched for a little while. I've never seen that kind of numbers before or since. That was 45 years ago, and I remember it like it was yesterday. Story 8 was once first on the scene to a pedestrian hit by a car. I was just a pizza delivery guy, but got there before anyone else. Her arms were obviously broken, and her face was road-rashed real bad. She wasn't breathing, but as I was about to move her to start CPR, she thankfully started breathing. Also, luckily, cops got there within a minute, and I went to console the guy who hit her. She bolted out in front of him when he had a green light. He was also a frequent customer that I delivered to and gave rides home from parties when he was drunk. I never saw him after that. I hope he's okay. Never heard what happened to the woman either. Story 9. A pod of dolphins guiding me toward our tour boat in Hawaii. I had gotten separated from my partner and swallowed too much seawater. Couldn't see the boat, but these dolphins appeared. We weren't supposed to touch them, so I went in the opposite direction from where they came from. About 5 minutes later, the boat showed up in front of me and they pulled me onto the deck. The tour guide said they do that sometimes if they can tell someone is in trouble. They were the only other people to see the pod behind me, and sadly by the time someone thought to take a picture, the dolphins had already gone. Story 10. I saw a meteorite flying right at me and watched it explode. I thought it was a light from something way up on the side of a mountain in Arizona as I was driving west along I-40, and I was trying to remember what was there, as I had driven across Arizona a lot. Then it just boomed and startled me a little until I figured out what had happened. Story 11. Back in the late 1980s, I went to a tiny village at the top of some Andean mountain in the hopes of seeing condors the next dawn. The people there were all native Quechua speakers, but also spoke Spanish. They were all farmers. I and the other half-dozen tourists there had a communal-style dinner, and were about to retire when the town turned off the generator that was the sole source of power. It was a perfectly clear night. I wasn't fortunate enough to see condors the next day, but I will never forget the sight of the sky that night. I doubt I will ever see so many stars again, and I wonder if more than a handful of people today ever will. Story 12. We were the last riders to go on the roller coaster because of a big storm. Lightning started flashing everywhere. As we creeped up the hill, it started raining. We started down, and the lightning and the rain was so fantastic, scary, and super fun at the same time. Story 13. Bad. When the circus came to town in the 90s with real animals, I was in the second row and the elephants went around in a circle while the women were doing twists a few stories up and one fell 10 feet from us. Splat, turned off the lights, and the elephants went nuts. Good. First time in WA in the Sound, and we went crabbing. We see a pod of orcas coming and a seal jumps in the boat. Just like the video on Reddit that gets reposted, the orcas popped their heads up and watched him. Scary at first, but pretty cool looking back. The seal got away. Story 14. This happened in the 80s. I was in 5th or 6th grade. I was jumping on the trampoline with a couple of neighbors. We saw only what I best describe as a futuristic white shuttle-type aircraft slowly flying low above my house. It was heading north. It was white and completely flat on the bottom. It had horizontal red light panels on the bottom that lit of like landing lights when they are directing planes where to land. I don't have the word to describe it. It had a cockpit. I saw the side window and the windshield. It didn't make any noise. It was an oddity, but I didn't think much about it because we had an Air Force base close by, and it was headed in the direction of a small airport that was in the next city over. Just thought it was a millionaire guy's crazy dream airplane or an experimental military aircraft. Does anybody know what this was? Does it sound familiar? Story 15, Petrolhead from a young age. At about 11 years old, I saw a Rolls-Royce Merlin engine on a giant stand, stopped and stared. Seconds into my daydreaming, they fired it up. Holy hell in a handbasket. Straight through pipes, V12 monster. Jumped about 40% of my body height backward and fell in love. I doubt I'll ever experience it again, but I'll never forget it hammering my lungs and breathing fire. That sound in a plane like a Spitfire, you would feel like a dragon hunting the skies. Story 16. The principal motioned for my 5th grade teacher to step out of class to tell him something, and then my teacher came back in and told us that the Space Shuttle Challenger had exploded. He then went and got a TV and rolled it in for all of us to watch the news coverage. Space Shuttle Challenger, go at throttle up, is etched in my brain. Story 17. Once I was camping in a remote part of the PNW during the Perseid meteor shower. In the middle of the night, my family and I went to this meadow in the woods nearby and laid down in the grass to watch the meteors. I didn't know this was possible, but the forest was so silent that night that we could hear the meteors crackling through the atmosphere, and they left visible smoke trails in the sky for a few seconds. It felt so dreamlike and surreal. It's a memory I treasure. Story 18. Once I was on a bus and some belligerent guy started harassing people. Another guy stood up to him and it got heated. Stop at the next stop. We're taking this outside, the Challenger said. Bus driver did that and the belligerent guy got off the bus first. Okay, close the door, the Challenger said. And the bus driver quickly did so and drove off. Everyone burst into laughter and cheers. It was amazing. Story 19. I saw a storm and all of a sudden it was raining little tiny frogs. Thousands. Apparently the updraft picked up the frogs from the big ponds below my workplace and they rained down all over our parking lots. They very quickly dispersed, I guess, making their way back to the pond. No joke. It was wild. Story 20. When I was younger, a doe walked out of the forest and up to 12 feet away from me. I held my hands up repeating, "It's okay, I won't hurt you," as the doe started walking slowly closer to me. She stood right in front of my hands, sniffed them while looking me straight in my eyes. I touched her nose. My brother yelled, "Deer!" So I rushed her off yelling, "Run, don't let him get you." Story 21. My family and I stopped on the side of an oceanside road in Aotearoa, New Zealand to get a picture of the ocean. I looked down and there was a baby fur seal at my feet. He blended into the rocks so well I hadn't noticed him until then. Then we started looking around and realized there were dozens more, all the same color as the rocks, and watching us curiously. Story 22. At a family outing in southern Saskatchewan, around 1977, we were playing a makeshift game of baseball when two Huey helicopters landed out in deep center field. A guy jumps out with a megaphone and says, "Who wants a ride?" Turns out that CFB Moosejaw does training exercises on my grandmother's land, so to say thank you, they offer anyone who is there a 20-minute ride. It was amazing. Story 23. There was one night a girl and I had went out on a date and went back to my house to watch a movie. She left about 10 that night, but when we were walking to her car, there must have been a billion fireflies. It was like nothing I have seen before or since. They were everywhere and it was really amazing. Story 24. Climbed a dormant volcano in Sumatra, Indonesia. Grueling hike. Camped out on top. No view to speak of due to fog. At sunrise, we were above the clouds or thick cloud-like mountain mist, and I saw the clouds streaming like a river down the side of the volcano. It did not last long, but the sunrise cast a pink-orange glow on the clouds below us as they streamed like a waterfall. We could see the peaks of other mountains above the lake of clouds. It was glorious. Story 25. I was 5 the first and only time I saw Mount Rushmore. I will never forget that. I remember being amazed by how big the men on the mountain were and thinking they were rock giants sleeping. I also very intensely remember pulling on my dad's shirt and asking him how they blow their noses. I also overheard another family saying it was cold and asked my dad, if those men get colds, how do they not get everyone dirty? He didn't understand that comment. I meant like, what if they have runny noses? I was completely serious. I did not know they were presidents. After getting older and realizing the significance of our family trip to that monument, I am thankful that my parents made the trip. I want to go back someday. I just don't have the time or the energy to plan a trip like that right now. However, I still very much want to go back. If anything, just to go through memory lane on the same land. I think, because my dad is no longer with me, I will most likely cry and be that weird American tourist that cries at the sight of Mount Rushmore, LOL. Story 26. A full-size bear runs straight past me and my mom at full speed, maybe a foot away at best. It took us both a few seconds to process what just happened before we realized, oh, that was a bear. We made our way off the trail at a fairly brisk pace after that. Story 27. The aurora borealis covering almost the entire sky with an almost perfect ring around a full moon. It looked like the moon was generating the colors and shooting moon rays in 360 degrees. This was 35 years ago while I was walking to the school bus in Alaska. What I wouldn't give to go back in time with my phone to catch it. Lasted about 10 minutes before it melted away into a normal display. Story 28. I don't think I can pick a single one. I've been fortunate to have quite a few memorable experiences. Riding through a fjord in southern Alaska to land on the surface of a glacier was awesome in many ways. Seeing the glacier both from an overhead view in the helicopter and then from directly on the surface gave unique perspective on the whole thing. Flying through the fjord where the mountains on either side rose higher than we were flying was also incredible to see. A sunrise with a crystal clear sky from the middle of the Gulf of Mexico with nothing but water visible in any direction. I climbed up into the tuna tower of the boat to watch the sunrise, and it was a fantastic decision. Watching the colors grow and change and increasingly flicker off the ripples on the ocean surface was amazing. Sunrise from the peak of the Halakala volcano in Hawaii. I thought it was just a tourist trap type of thing, but I was thankfully wrong. It was absolutely stunning. Watching the space shuttle launch. We went to see an afternoon launch and delays pushed to just after dark. The shuttle's engines made it look like the sun had risen again, and the sound was as if the earth was being ripped in half beneath us. The noise was so loud you felt it as much as heard it. Story 29. Got lost trying to find a post office that ultimately didn't exist. Postal worker used old stationery. Came across a random-ass drawbridge in a field. No water, no creek, no pond, no moat, no Renfest in that county. Just a random AF drawbridge just chillin' in a grassy meadow. Oh yeah, and possibly ball lightning in 3 different colors. Story 30. I was a contractor doing work at a U.S. Major League Baseball stadium the day before opening day, and I will never forget when I walked into the service elevator, and there was a bald eagle with its trainer on their way to practice their majestic soaring eagle stunt they would be performing for everyone during the opening day ceremony the next day. I even got to watch them practice several times while I was on the field doing my thing. It was like my own little personal show. Story 31. An older man with a walking stick at Wat Po Temple in Bangkok. As he was leaving the temple precinct, he turned and cupped his hands in front of his face, then bowed. I swear that man exuded so much peace and wisdom, he made the Dalai Lama look like a flibber to gibbet. He's still with me more than a decade later. Story 32. I traveled through the entire galaxy in 45 minutes on a ketamine IV treatment for anxiety/depression. Changed my life. At age 36, I lost 70 pounds, finished my BS in electrical engineering. I will never forget the alien who came back in room where I was being treated to take out my IV. Switch felt exactly like when Neo wakes up for the first time in the Matrix. The alien who woke me up ended up being the nursing assistant. Nice dude, but for 45 mins he looked like the Predator. Story 33. I was allowed to enter Yellowstone National Park while it was still closed during the winter months, late January in my case. There was maybe 10 people for 100 miles in any direction. Seeing that place covered in snow lit by starlight and moonlight, a herd of bison sleeping huddled together under a tree as snow started to pile up on their backs and shoulders. It hardly even felt like I was on Earth for an hour while driving out of the park in the very early morning hours before the sun starts to even gray the sky. Story 34. Driving on interstate, I saw a semi take a curve a little too sharp. His whole truck flipped into a guardrail. As the semi tumbled, the guardrail wrapped around it like a corkscrew. The truck landed on a car with a family of 3 that I had been pacing with for a couple hours. The truck and car were instantly engulfed in flames. Nobody was able to make it out. I'll never forget the sequence of events out of my head. Story 35. Male white lion in Kruger. One of only 2 males that live in the wild in the world. His name is Casper. I spent 2 weeks in the park on a self-drive safari. On my last day, I got up at 4:30 a.m. to leave and go catch my flight. This lion is laying in the middle of the road, taking a nap. We spent an hour together. He was sleeping, rubbed his rump against my truck bumper, and looked me dead on the eye from 10 feet away at times. Eventually, he sauntered off when another person drove down the road and he wanted some peace. It was such a surreal, cathartic experience. Seeing a truly unique animal, powerful but so peaceful on a quiet morning. Missed my flight and had to spend another $1,500 to get back home. It's worth every penny. Story 36. We were traveling from Detroit to San Diego on I-70, Colorado, going through Vail Pass at around 10 p.m. There was a long stretch of black ice, so I slowed way down. A Jeep with a covered trailer passed us going faster than was safe. About a mile later, we came upon the driver in the middle of the road in a crumpled mess. The Jeep was on its side, and there were a couple of dogs barking in the trailer that was still upright. The driver was not conscious, and there was a gurgling sound as they breathed. It was cold, so we grabbed a couple of blankets out of the back of our car and did our best to cover them without moving them. It took about a half an hour for the He State Police arrived, another half an hour for the ambulance to get there. We left shortly after the ambulance showed up, leaving our blankets behind. This happened 37 years ago, and I still think about that night. This was before the internet, so I never did find out if they survived. Story 37. When doing excavations on a Spanish shipwreck from 1705, I saw the most perfect Cinderella-type broom, just standing upright, leaning in a corner like it had just been stowed there. Perfectly preserved. What a moment, realizing that the last person to see that was sweeping the deck with it during the golden age of pirates. I should write a book because looking back, I've had a lot of wow moments like that. Story 38. About a month ago, we were at our cabin in northern Michigan with our friends. While sitting outside with a campfire, in the middle of the night, a huge, intensely bright flash lit up the sky. We were startled and confused by what it could be. After a little web searching, I determined it was most likely a larger-than-average asteroid comet exploding in Earth's atmosphere, also known as a bolide. It was very beautiful and memorable, also humbling by how fragile and insignificant we are in comparison to the universe. Story 39. I was invited to visit a shogun house and plantation when I was working in Japan. It was closed most of the year, but occasionally would open. I will never forget the beam of the roof. It was one continuous piece of tree trunk, petrified over years. It was so beautiful and so enormous. I'm grateful it survived the war. The trees of old must have been massive. Story 40. Was sitting on a rock during deer hunting season, looking down over a wooded valley when a porcupine just sort of trundled slowly past and climbed up a pine tree behind me, settled himself into the crook of some branches, and promptly went to sleep. Completely didn't give a about me being there less than 10 feet away. Sat there for about 3 hours like that. I'll always remember little porcupine buddy. Story 41. A tiny spot only a few feet in diameter that was snowing. Nowhere else, just that one spot. My partner and I had driven up to Cataloochee to drive over the mountain, but the road was closed, so we got out just to walk around for a few in the woods, and our secret little snowfall was right there. Amazing and very special for both of us. Story 42. Watching a Turon in Theodore Roosevelt National Park climb a fence and actually attempt to ride a 2,500 pounds bison with a phone in her hand. The bison, it was during rutting season, shook her off its back, hooked its horn beneath her shirt and stripped it off, kicked her twice, then horned her pants by the belt loop and made her stark naked laying in the field. The bison then turned away, and she crawled 50 yards to the fence, yelling at her apparent spouse to climb the fence and help her. and he just shook his head. A couple of men helped stretch the barbed wire to allow her to get through and limp to her car. I was proud to see something I'll never see again. Story 43. Two sparrows fighting. They looked like roosters having a cockfight. They were in the air but getting lower to the ground as they fought. This happened where the road met my driveway. I was late for work, so I hit the gas, and when I saw them, it was too late. I hit both with my car before they reached the ground. Another time, a hawk had picked up something next to the road. I was speeding down a country road, BC. I was late for a wedding. I saw the hawk take off from the ground towards the road surrounded by trees on both sides. I ended up hitting it and its dinner with passenger side headlight. Story 44. My family and I were taking a coast-to-coast train ride 2 days before Hurricane Katrina. When we were passing through New Orleans, the sky looked almost red. It's so hard to explain. I remember watching the Proud Family movie. It had just come out on Disney, and saying goodbye to a little boy from a family we had made friends with who got off at that stop. I hope they're all okay. Story 45-5. Orange glowing objects kind in the shape of a prolate spheroid, football, only flatter and wider, more saucer-shaped. And they seemed to be lying in a line of formation just above the treetops. But I'm sure they looked closer because of their size. All of these objects were glowing as a solid orange light. Story 46. A humpback whale leaping out of the water. I'm still amazed that a creature that big can exist. It was quite close to the boat we were on too. The only other thing I remember is being cold and miserable on that boat. But that leap was worth it. Absolutely magnificent. I don't understand how sailors back in the day could see that and think, we should it. Story 47. A bunyip. Now I'm a fairly level-headed guy, and I know bunyips is just folklore, like Bigfoot and Nessie. But on the edge of the outback in a small town in Australia, at dusk we saw an animal in a pond that could not exist. No other known animal has that shape. Mind you, I hadn't had a single VB at that time. Later on, I saw some interpretations, drawings of how a bunyip should look, and some got close to what we saw. I'm sure I'll never see another. Story 48. A huge orange UFO that looked like a harvest moon. It was dusk, and it was hovering at ground level in an Amish farmyard next door to where I was living. There was a very tall oak tree in front of it, and it dwarfed that tree in height. The air was totally silent. I just stood on my back porch, staring in disbelief. I turned for just a second to get my phone to take a pic and looked back, and it was gone. Story 49. Last week, I got to see the northern lights for the first time in my life, right over my very own house. Due to the solar storms that have been going on, I live in western Massachusetts and thought I would never be able to see the northern lights without having to travel. It was incredible. I cried, and I hope to never forget that experience. Story 50. Travis Pastrana competing in freestyle motocross at his peak. Good Lord, it was a shocking display of skill even compared to the other pros. Hopefully will change one day, but seeing Buckethead live, similar to Pastrana in that it was such a mind-blowing level of talent and musical ability, my jaw was on the floor the whole time. Story 51. The ISS while it was on Earth. It hadn't been painted white yet. It was orange. My father was studying medicine and the effects from space at Johnson Space Center. I was told how important it was, and that I would hear about it in the news eventually. I was only 12, so the experience didn't register. Now as an adult, I realize how unique that very experience was. Story 52. Humphrey the Whale on San Francisco Bay. I was working dockside and saw in the distance the Coast Guard boats following Humphrey, and you could clearly see him surfacing. While I was working, the Humphrey and boats were getting closer, but I hadn't noticed. In what seemed like moments, they were very close, and suddenly, Humphrey surfaced next to the dock I was on. For the briefest of moments, I was looking Humphrey in the eye about maybe less than 15 feet away. It was over in seconds before he continued his mosey around SF Bay, but I couldn't be sure if he actually paused that moment he spotted me. For some strange reason, a George Costanza line comes to mind. Edit. Golf balls were not involved. Story 53. One bitter cold winter night. When I was in college, I had been studying at the student center and left to walk back to my dorm. This was at a tiny college in a remote, rural location, so there was little light to keep me from seeing the sky clearly. It was a full moon night with a thin veil of high clouds. I would expect to see a ring around the moon on a night like that, but I saw 3 rings. The innermost was oval, about 4 degrees, moon width, wide on either side of the moon and maybe 6 degrees long. The second ring was circular and about 20 degrees wide, and the outermost was immense, encompassing half of the visible sky. And I was the only one out in the sub-zero cold to witness it. I stood there just staring in awe until I was chilled straight through, about 20 minutes. I will never forget that. Story 54. The solar eclipse in Cornwall, 1999. On the beach, after a whole weekend festival, The dark came in, sweeping across the sea with the wildlife falling silent and New Age travelers cycling contraptions on the beach. Nearly missed it, but my festival friend persuaded me to get out of the tent. I'll also never forget the 9 hours drive north afterwards with the roads clogged up and us both suffering. Story 55. I last accessed Upper Juan Higuera Creek in Big Sur about 22 years ago. A treacherous scramble and hike on an old cliff trail my family put in years ago. After the trail mellowed out to relative flats, we were surrounded by the stuff we usually found there. A meandering stream valley with 250 feet old growth redwoods. However, this time we went, everything was covered by ladybugs. I'm not talking hundreds of thousands. I'm talking millions. Now, wrap that back with the beautiful stream and the sunlight filtering through the redwoods. It was an amazing sight, and the only downside is that we didn't bring cameras to record it. I've had plenty of other things, like the sunrise break the horizon over Goat Island Mountain while climbing Rainier and diving along a 45-degree sand slope to oblivion in Tahoe, etc. But live Mother Nature in Big Sur that day was pretty spectacular. Story 56. I've seen some bad things, but I'm going to go with a good experience. About 20 years ago, I was in the ocean in Cape Hatteras and a manatee swam by. I have seen plenty of dolphins swimming in the ocean. I grew up in Virginia Beach, but never a manatee. I didn't think that they came that far north. It was slightly surreal and awesome. Story 57. Was sitting at a red light, and this car, also sitting at the light, just gets blistered from behind. A bunch of us get out to go and help with what we can. The trunk of the car was in the back seat. Pinched between them were 2 kids. They were maybe 7, 8 years old, just screaming for help. We eventually managed to make an exit for them, but that is something I will never in my life forget. Story 58. A few years ago, I walked out on the deck of our hunting camp to pee late at night. Our camp is very remote with zero light pollution to speak of. Pretty much every year during hunting season, I take a midnight pee in the darkest dark I've ever seen and marvel at how bright and vibrant the stars are. It's one of those things that I don't intentionally set out to do, but am awestruck every time because you just don't see the night sky like that where I now live. Well, on this particular night, the Starlink satellite train, which I knew nothing about at the time, was above me, and I, still heavily buzzed, had a semi-freak out. I don't recall in the moment if I thought it was aliens, missiles. I don't know. I went in and told the guys something crazy was going on outside, and when they came to check it out, one of them knew what it was. We still laugh about it today, but at the time I felt like I was in some sort of movie and the world was about to end. Story 59. I have several, but these stand out. Seeing my dad in his casket when I was 6 years old, I can still see his face. Seeing 3 tornadoes funnel clouds in the sky at the same time in the 7th grade. We had to walk outside from the gym to the main part of the school, and the tornado sirens were going off. Of course, we all looked up and stood there watching the tornadoes dance in the sky. One of our teachers yelled out the window for us to get into the school and take cover. Driving home on the interstate one night after drinking in the bars in another town, looking up and seeing headlights coming right at me, I swerved and missed the car in front of me by no more than a couple of feet. I was in the process of passing a car, and a person in the back seat said I didn't miss them by more than a couple of feet. I pulled over and sat there for about 5 minutes, just thankful that we were all still alive. I have many more, but those 3 stand out. Story 60. This would probably fall into the category of both seeing and experiencing, but recently, I walked outside to find that our house was positioned in the eye of a hurricane. Howling winds, but surrounded by a clear, star-filled night. 20 minutes later, once the eye passed, was hit with 110 miles per hour winds and pouring rain for the following 5 hours. Story 61. My hometown has a lot of schools. We had a middle and junior high, north and south, for both sides of the town. Around 2007, the junior high north building caught on fire. What makes this relevant is that my dad had just started working as a firefighter, and it was his 3rd day on the job. Me, my sister, brother, and mom stood on a hill in front of the school and watched it burn. My classmates in HS always said, "Man, I want to watch this school burn to the ground." You think that until you watch it happen, and your dad is next to the pickup truck-sized hole in the roof that's billowing flames. Story 62. Did a guided catamaran tour to see marine life. High waves, much wind. Besides my dad, former Marine, me and the crew, literally everyone got seasick. A black lady started by using the restroom, and Christ, she was pale, poor her. Then others started puking into the water, their hands in their sleeves. It was somewhat hilarious and horrific at the same time, like bad comedy. I've seen some dolphins, flying fish, and smaller fish, though, and enjoyed their hydrophones/whale songs with gentle puke background noises. We'll never forget. Story 63. Deployment on the Pacific Ocean, in a rainstorm. I happened to be walking through the hangar bay at the time the battle group emerged from the back end of a storm wall. What was special was the positioning of the second storm wall we were headed straight into. For about 5 minutes, we were sailing between the back of one and the front of another wall of water. It was like there was a pathway carved between the clouds curving off to the horizon. That, coupled with the slow emergence of one of the cruisers attached to the group also emerging from the rain, that was kind of neat too. Story 64. I was driving east from Elko, Nevada at dawn. There had been a lot of rain in the area in previous days. I was the only car driving the road with water right up to the sides of the road. It was as if I was driving across a huge lake. The water stretched in all directions, and I was the only object in sight. After a while, I saw something ahead on the road. As I approached, it turned out to be 2 golden eagles feasting on a sheep carcass. The whole morning was quite surreal. Story 65. I took my infant daughter and my young nephew to see a SpaceX launch and booster landing. It was probably one of the cooler things I've seen in person. Also saw a Falcon launch on my way to work, and I thought it was an alien until I looked it up when I got to my desk. Sometimes I take for granted how lucky I am to live in an era where space travel is so frequent and also live in an area with no light pollution. I get caught up in the day-to-day that I truthfully don't look up as often as I should to appreciate what is out there. Story 66. I've seen a woman abandon all senses, surrendering personal data, the data of her partner, birth date, birth location, home city, former address, and other identifiable details to potentially hundreds of millions of views. The crazy part is this, she said. I'd never share personal information to strangers. That'd be crazy. Welcome to Crazy Town, visitors and residents alike. What's a hobby that sounds lame but is secretly awesome? Story 1. I think it might be bird watching. It sounds lame, but the serious ones fly all over the world, visit remote areas with local guides, and contribute to the field of ornithology as citizen scientists. As a community, they also do a lot of preservation work, especially with migratory birds that cross international borders. Edit. It's been great hearing everyone's stories about birdwatching and birding. Thank you all for sharing your thoughts, knowledge, anecdotes, etc. Story 2. Gardening may sound lame, but it's actually awesome because it's therapeutic, reduces stress, and promotes mindfulness. It allows for creativity and design, keeps you physically active, and provides rewarding results like beautiful plants or homegrown veggies. It also fosters community connections and offers educational opportunities about plants and sustainability. Overall, it's a fulfilling and enriching hobby. Story 3. Astronomy. Photons from deep space traveled hundreds, thousands, millions, billions of light years to land on your retinas and be observed by you. Those are your photons. No one else will ever experience them as you did. The objects you see in deep space are as they were all those years ago, a snapshot in time for us. Currently, they could look very different or be gone entirely. We would never know. Story 4. Flying kites. So few people do it these days, and you can see them lingering around looking. They want to come up and talk to you and watch the kites, but a lot of them can't, so they walk on. But some folks come up and talk, and I let them fly the kite for a while, and adults get so childlike when they do it. It's awesome. If their kids are with them, the kids want to fly the kites too. It's pretty awesome. They're these enormous whale and octopus kites, and we can pay out about 350 yards of line. They get way up there in the sky. Adults and kids alike just love it. I wish more people would do it. There's some kind of return to innocence when people fly kites. I wonder how many people in today's world never flew a kite before, despite it being a classic childhood hobby. Also, riding electric scooters. You can explore for 8-10 miles around your home without having to drive a car or risk riding a motorcycle. You and the kids can all go together. It's so much fun. You find so many cool, weird little places and things when you break out of the car driving routine and go exploring. Story 5. Beekeeping. Managing hundreds of thousands of stinging insects, ensuring that they don't swarm, making sure they are healthy, understanding what they're doing and why, and a load of honey at the end. Not to forget the wax, candles, lip balms, hand creams, etc. Story 6. Playing chess. Seems like a needs game. Ironically, while in jail, I learned to play chess over a decade ago. Honestly saved my life during those 16 months of a sentence, and I still like a game now. Keeps the brain active and can always learn with chess. Lifting weights may seem lame to some, but seeing me get bigger and stronger is pretty awesome for me and my wife. Story 7. Metal detecting is rad. Whether it's at the park or a historical site of an old home or battlefield. You'll find a lot of old pop tabs and tin foil, but you'll also find coins, bottles with metal caps, buttons, spoons, etc. It's an incredible thing to have unearthed something, to be the first person to touch this lost treasure in a very long time. Same goes for hunting for bottles in creek beds, riverbeds, or finding old dump sites. Just a couple weeks ago, I found a Listerine bottle from the late 1910s. How sick is that? Story 8. I often heard knitting be reserved for little old ladies, mainly by people who don't know knitting beyond what grandma used to do. Excuse you. I love having cozy hand-knitted sweaters that can literally last years if well taken care of, as opposed to 2 or 3 with fast fashion crap. Same with blankets, socks, and hats. And don't even get me started on the wonders of crochet. You can make your own plushies with that. Story 9. Tabletop gaming, modern board games. People see it as some nerd thing, but in actuality, they're super fun, complex puzzles that you can figure out with a group of friends. I can't tell you how many friends have said, "I don't like board games," only to get super into it once they finally bite the bullet and try them out. I always tell people, do you like poker, chess, pool? Well then, you like playing games. Hell, even sports are a form of gaming, just ones that involve more physicality than logic sometimes. A good lesson to leave preconceived notions that may be limiting us from trying new things. Story 10. Driving. I love going on drives just for fun, but it sounds kind of dull to have that as a hobby. So I often don't share with others that it's a hobby of mine, even though it's one of my favorite things. I love finding pretty roads to drive on. And I'll roll the windows down and put on my favorite music playlists. Or I'll go with my husband, and we'll just talk while driving around for like an hour or more. Road tripping is also intertwined with having a driving hobby, and it's always so fun getting to explore new places by car. Story 11. Frisbee golf, frolf as some call it. That name makes it sound surprisingly lame. It's incredibly fun. There's a whole pro tour full of unbelievably good players. The thing that makes it awesome you've got a backpack of about 20 discs, some with epic custom artwork, and they all fly different. The courses tend to be in beautiful wooded areas around lakes and canyons sometimes. When you nail your throw and it laces an S-curve through the trees to land right where you planned it, you'll be in love too. Story 12. Square dancing. There's a great community, and it's very different than it looks. You'll be mentally exhausted, not physically. Lots of engineers and programmers are into it because it's like a puzzle, and you have someone else calling out the moves, and you don't know where things are going. Story 13. Sewing. You can find anything in a material pattern. I've made pillowcases for Christmas presents with universal monsters on them, teams, pets, all kinds of interests. I've made quilts, the same idea. The drawback is that material is like crack. You end up with plastic totes full of cloth that you're going to use. Story 14. Ham radio. I know everyone thinks it's just a bunch of old fat guys chatting on the radio, but we make contacts with people all around the world. We provide emergency communications during disasters, provide support for marathons, bicycle races, football games, and more. On the day after Christmas in 2004, I should have been playing with my kids and their new toys, but I was on my radio in my office piddling around. I heard a call for help from Banda Ace, Indonesia. They had just been through a tsunami and everything was destroyed, and they were calling for help. From Atlanta, Georgia, there's not a whole lot I could do, so I called the State Department and the Coast Guard in Miami. It's all I could think to do. I know I'm not the only ham operator to hear them and respond, but it feels good to be a part of helping people when you can. Yes, we are nerds, but we're helpful nerds.